Yalimadat, everybody. I'm Salima Remtulla, and it is my pleasure to serve as your moderator as we engage in a conversation about the dynamics of family businesses today. My parents run a financial consulting and accounting practice, and we're also active in the real estate industry. So this is a topic I've been attuned to since my elementary school days, when I remember my sister and I would join my parents in the office on weekends leading up to tax deadlines and on construction sites whenever we were building a new hotel. My own professional background is in the investment management industry. Now, what we've got here today is the final installment in a 4-part series on the psychology of contracts in business. And those of you who would have joined us for the last several episodes would have developed a toolbox that is broadly applicable in a broad range of business contexts. So what we're going to do today is explore the application of those tools in a context that is extremely common in our enterprising and entrepreneurial community, that of the family business. We're also going to explore some proactive strategies we can take to avoid disputes that have proven to be effective in this context. Now, before we dive in, it falls on me to disclaim for you that all of the views and opinions that you'll hear in the course of our discussion only represent our own personal views and opinions and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of our employers or affiliates. In addition, any information that you see presented in this webinar does not constitute tax, financial, investment, or legal advice. With that said, I am so thrilled to now have the opportunity to introduce you to the 3 panelists we have joining us for this conversation, who bring tremendous breadth and depth of experience to this discussion. So let me take a minute to just tell you a little bit about each one of them. Nadir Mohamed is the former CEO of Rogers Communications, and he was appointed to the Order of Canada in 2019 for his contributions to the telecommunications industry, as well as for fostering innovation and entrepreneurship in Canada in general. As the CEO of Rogers, which is a family-controlled company, Nadir has a really unique lens on our topic today. He now serves on a variety of corporate and not-for-profit boards and has been named by Bloomberg as one of the world's most successful immigrants. Ambreen Balu is a designated family enterprise advisor, and she's also a certified coach who works with business families towards the end goal of harmonious transfers of legacy and wealth. She comes from a business family herself, so she understands firsthand the competing demands of family, business, and ownership. Ambreen is also a board member of Family Enterprise Canada's foundation. And Nizar has over 30 years of executive management experience in the real estate industry, having founded the family-owned Sutter Hill group of companies that operates all across North America. Nizar is a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, and he has served our community in a number of capacities, including as the president of the Aga Khan Ismaili Council for Canada, a member of the International Ismaili Leaders Forum, as one of the original board members of the Aga Khan Foundation Canada, and as the first chair of Focus Humanitarian Assistance. Now, as we kick things off today, I want to take a moment just to reflect back to the first webinar in this series, where we heard Ali Lakhani share Hazar Imam's guidance for all interactions related to managing conflict and business ethics. Specifically, we heard that it all comes down to love. And there is no context in which I think it would be more applicable to consider this guidance than when we are talking about family businesses and the explicitly overlapping relationships of family, business, and ownership. So let's get started. And Ambreen, perhaps to lead us into our discussion today, would you share with us some of your thoughts on why this topic is important and relevant for our Jamaat?
Thank you. Absolutely. We all know and have seen a tremendous growth in wealth within the community, not only amongst business families, but also amongst professionals, something to be very proud of. In the next 2 decades, we will see the great wealth transfer, a historically unprecedented transfer of a huge amount of wealth, estimated between 10 and 60 trillion dollars that will be passed from baby boomers to their heirs. And unfortunately, we will also hopefully potentially avoid, but be faced with this phenomenon, this slide that we see here, which is the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves phenomenon, where in the first generation, which we call G1, we're building wealth. And then by the third generation, unfortunately, it's dwindled and it's done. We don't want to be in that situation. So critically, it's so important that we're planning proactively. We are being responsible about stewardship, and I would argue we focus on family harmony. The last piece, that we need to realize is that the involvement of next gen may be questionable. Either they may not be ready or may not be interested. And the research is showing us that. Actually, Family Enterprise Foundation just released a study around that. And so these are the things that I think we can keep in mind as we speak today. We have a short amount of time to cover a lot of ground. There's plenty to learn in this space. Lots of resources available, and we'll attempt to scratch the surface. I have one invitation for you, or we have one invitation for you, and that is if each person can take away even just one idea that resonates, that helps you move your family's wealth story forward, then I think we have achieved some success today.
Thank you for that call to action. And I think that's a helpful overview of the specific context within our community. And now I wonder, Nizar, one of the buzzwords of the last 18 months that we're all, I think, familiar with and maybe tired of hearing is that we're living through unprecedented times. So what are your thoughts on the current macroeconomic climate and the way that it's impacted businesses' needs?
When we talk about COVID chaos, we almost get tears in our eyes. Economic activities virtually came to a standstill. Downtown office buildings were all emptied out. Fortunately, they were able to work from home in the manner they could. But business activities came to a grinding halt. The only businesses that were allowed to remain open were essential services like grocery stores, pharmacies. But people were not brave enough to go out and face COVID virus. So technology came in, and it was not introduced by supermarkets. It was independent operators that provided that service. Just order whatever you want from any grocery store. It will be delivered to your home, including Costco. Then came the restaurants, fast food outlets. They were also using that platform, and everything was brought to your house. So, and many brand companies declared bankruptcies. Retail stores all over shut down. Now, whenever there is a pandemic or a crisis like this, there are opportunities. We saw what happened in 1992 when property market virtually crashed. Similar things happened here. Everybody expected a banking crisis, and bank shares dropped by almost 50%, expecting massive defaults. And people with money were just lining up to buy those bargain assets. It did not happen. It did not happen because governments borrowed $14 trillion. And the joke in the industry was they put it in helicopters, flew it all over the country, both Canada, USA, and just dropped dollars everywhere. That kept the economy going. Now we are just emerging and coming to the end of this pandemic, and business will start again. What will the post-pandemic period look like? What will be the market expectations? There are a lot of articles, guesswork. Nobody knows for sure. But one thing is certain. It will be, whatever it is, it will be driven by technology. Now, bringing that to family businesses, they will also have to prepare themselves for the new environment, recognizing that there are new opportunities providing this innovation. The only way to achieve and get into that is not just confining yourself to just you and your partners. my suggestion would be include the whole family, including your children. You'll be amazed at the ideas they come up with. And then see how you can position or reposition your businesses and take advantage of the new opportunities. So it's really the initiative, innovation that will come from family members.
That's perfect. Thank you. And I love the reminder that on the other side of challenge is opportunity, and also that this is not a conversation we were just having about the legacy of the last generation of Ismaili business people needing to transition wealth, that this is a developing space, that there will be new opportunities and new businesses built, and that there's an opportunity to plan proactively to build those with best practices in mind.
Right.
So, I know all of you bring very, very different experiences to the table here, and I want to make sure we have an opportunity to hear your stories. I wonder if, Nadir, we might start with you and hear a little bit about your experience, and maybe one challenge that sort of surfaces prominently for you as you think about family businesses. Sure,
thanks, Salima. And it's interesting. You started with a reference to your family and your exposure to them. And I have vivid memories of my mom and myself spending time with my dad in his business late in the evenings. And the store was essentially closed. All the staff had gone home, and there he was working away. And, what's fascinating as I look back, there was never a sense that, the family would have me or my sister get into the business. It was always understood that this next generation, first generation immigrants in Canada, would actually be quote unquote educated, and success was seen as a big corporate job. I only raise this to say that as we talk about family businesses, it's not for everybody, and it's perfectly legitimate to think of an answer that says we sell the business and move on. Having said that, my in my adult life, my experience has really been through the experience I had with Rogers and working subsequently with other family businesses. And I remember at the time when I made the switch moving from TELUS to Rogers, you have to understand from an industry point of view, TELUS was seen at the time in particular as a corporate entity, came from a history of telephone company. If you were positive, you would say it was really well run, efficient process, well laid out. If you were less generous, you'd say bureaucratic. Moving to Rogers, I remember thinking about this. This is going to be entrepreneurial, growth oriented, again, very positive. People that were less positive would have said, somewhat chaotic. So with that, I approached the job, and I really, it was my first exposure to understanding the role of an entrepreneur and a founder, which is really unique. It's amazing. You can be an owner, something definitely be the founder and entrepreneur, and in this case, controlling a large public company. I remember thinking about that and saying, I wonder what it's like. And I'll give you, a snapshot that I think captures, what it means to be working with an entrepreneur. When I joined, I used to joke that if you wanted to change the color of the carpet in your office, you'd have to go to Ted, because he was the owner and the founder, and he made all the decisions. Having said that, if you wanted to buy a company and it was $1 billion company, there was only one person you had to talk to, and that was Ted. And you walked in, spent half an hour, and his first question would at the end be like, how come we don't have this already? We should go get it done. That same process at TELUS would take you, and I use TELUS, it would be any corporate entity, you'd have to go through committees and boards and so on. And that's the difference. The reality is founders generally tended to be relentless, driven, involved in every decision. But the reality is also that over time, the business grows, it matures, it has scale, it needs processes, it needs teams, it needs structures, and potentially it needs capital for growth. And there comes a time when every founder has to make a decision with his family or her family. Do we have a family member that continues? What are the skills required? Is there talent, or should we go outside and get quote unquote professional management? Obviously a huge decision. There is no right or wrong, but I would say it's a decision that has to be made with a lot of thought, and in particular thought around what's really required, because in general, it is very hard to think about a founder being succeeded by the same kind of personality, because generally speaking, the business has matured to a different stage. So, as we go further into the session and talk about family, ownership, and business, I'm sure we'll come back to the theme of, what are the right roles and where does family play a role versus management.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like you're making me remember a truism that I've heard over the course of my career, which is often what got you here won't get you there. And so it's really important to have those reflections in a very explicit way as we think about business continuity, that we can actually be agnostic as to what the path is, but that we need to make some sort of a conscious reflection and decision to define that path forward. Ambreen, you work with families all the time who are navigating these types of conversations. What would you surface for our audience as key things that families need to think about as they begin to scratch the surface of this type of reflection?
Okay. We're talking about succession, and let's talk about the language we use. Succession is about those urgent points in time when we're passing the baton, right? Founder is passing the baton to the second generation. What a proud moment. It's full of emotion. You can probably hear it in my voice. It's happened in our family. Those are big moments, but succession is also about continuity. And Hazra Mom talks to us about this lens that we need to have a long-term lens. We need to be thinking 3 to 5 generations out. So let's think about, while we're thinking of succession, the continuity, the preparation, the proactive planning, the governance we slowly put in place, the changes that are occurring over time. And let's be sure that we are not neglecting the continuity while we're looking at the succession. Second thing I would talk about is planning. Have your ducks in a row. Estate planning, tax planning, financial, critical, all of that, right? Business families are smart. They know to get those things done. Have your wills in place, your shareholder agreements, and have transparency around those things. I'll tell you a story about that later. However, do not forget the process side of things, the harmony that's going to keep your family together, whether you choose to operate the businesses or simply you're going to be stewards of wealth together. That human capital is really critical. And so be sure that you're balancing the content and process when you're doing the planning, so we're not ending up in short sleeves to short sleeves. The next thing I'd talk about in terms of planning, it behooves us to speak about next generation, right? Historically, I'm going to be a little stereotypical. Historically, businesses passed from fathers to sons. Maybe not so far in our history. We're in a new world. We need to understand the passions, the interests, even give the opportunity to our next generation to answer their own big questions in life. What is my purpose in life? What impact do I want to have on the world? Why am I walking this earth, right? And so those conversations about succession need to be wholesome. They need to include the whole family. And we need to be sure that there's a shared responsibility around succession. Preparing our next gen is not just about getting a Harvard or a Wharton MBA. It's more than that. Let's call it emotional intelligence or human skills or leadership skills. It takes a lot to prepare leaders. And like Nadir said, let's not forget the non-family leaders that could potentially be mentors and guides to family or advisors, etc.
Mm-hmm. And now, Nizar, you've had to really live this out in managing your own family business operations. Will you maybe share with our audience, because I'm sure they'd love to hear, what governance strategies and tools have you found effective in terms of getting all stakeholders on the same page in your business?
When I came to Canada, I came from London. I used to work in merchant banking. I couldn't get a job anywhere. So my choice was to accept whatever job is offered or become a limo driver. As you can see, many limo drivers have PhDs, but not recognized in Canada. So I accepted the first job, which was accounts payable clerk. To transition through that, I ended up in 1992 buying that company, Sutter Hill. It was part of Genstar Group, which was a multinational company. Having acquired the company, we started investing in real estate because I recognized that revenue from property management, even though it was large, is not going to accumulate capital for the children. So I formed a family trust, and I used the best lawyer in town. And so we started from that. Now, we operate our business, so it's me, my son, and my daughter. My wife, unfortunately, passed away. So 3 of us. We operate on the basis of or adopting the ethos of public company. And I would recommend everybody, you're running a business and you have family members, run it like a public company. Ethos of public company means transparency, integrity, and accountability. I run my business on that principle. Secondly, we're operations in the US, and we're sitting here. We don't know what goes on. So we have weekly reports, and all of us get on the call, Zoom calls, and we go through what's going on. And so everybody's aware. And you talk about the next generation, my grandkids, believe it or not, they also listen to it. So they know what's going on. I don't have to inspire them. They themselves know what to do. And someday, hopefully, they will adopt that. So having said that, by operating this way, you avoid conflicts. If you are operating like a public company, you have a board of directors, you have a business plan, and responsibilities are all laid out. Remuneration that we talked about is all laid out. Incentive scheme. This is all common sense in a way. But there is one aspect that we all have to be very careful about. We worry about COVID. There's another virus that has destroyed empires. If you read history, when I tell you what the virus is, it has destroyed empires. It has destroyed family wealth and split families. That virus is called jealousy and greed. So jealousy infused by greed creates all kinds of conflicts. Now, you mentioned earlier seminars, Hazrat Imam's guidance, and what was presented. He says, live by the spirit of your faith, ethical behavior. If you bear that in mind, business is not run on religious principles. It is what makes you wealthy and what keeps you engaged and involved. So those are the principles, but communication is very important. And this virus is very destructive. It is avoidable. It is avoidable.
That's perfect. Thank you, Nizar. I think that's such an important point, and I think it plays really nicely with what we've heard from Nadir and Ambreen as well, as we've really explored this idea of business continuity. You know, I think what we've heard really saliently here is the importance of being proactive, of really leaning into difficult conversations, engaging in them, building the relationships, building trust through those interactions, and being proactive so that there is, there are tools in place to ensure that everyone is sort of aligned in their visions and looking to the same future. I'm hoping that we can get to some more stories as well. And I wonder, Ambreen, what is a challenge that you have experienced or really sort of teased out as a theme as you've worked with business families, and are there tools that you use consistently when you work with families to help them navigate?
Yeah, absolutely. There are. We, if we could pull up the slide on the 3 circles, this family business system is extremely challenging, and can bring a lot of complexity. And let's look at the model. Okay, this was developed in 1982 by John Davis and Tagore. And the model shows us family business ownership, these 3 entities that overlap, and hence hence the complexity and the potential for conflict. So how we use this model, and our family uses this model, we've been using it for about 10 years, maybe longer, is really to understand what hat we're wearing when we are making which decisions. It's that simple. I'll give you an example. Compensating a second generation, a G2 family member that comes to work in the business. How do you make the decision on what compensation should be? So we heard it's got to be based on merit, right? It is, and I wish it was that simple, because families, let's say the founder, mother or father, sees their child coming into the business. They feel like, oh, I'm going to make this decision as a parent. No, that's not right. This is not pocket money or an allowance. They're not making the decision as a shareholder. They're making it from the business circle, as a business leader. What's right for the business? What can the business afford? What is the merit of the individual demand or require? And that's how we should. That's how we go about using this model. Having said that, conflict is normal. And it's really important to step into those tough conversations, whether it's where these circles overlap or where multiple people sit in a circle from family. It's really important to step into those tough conversations, and it's hard. And our family uses a facilitator. I know lots of families do, and it helps us create harmony and come back to this idea of love that Hazra Mom is talking about.
Salima, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second, if I can. Amrin, you mentioned the word love, and I think we've talked about that before. And, it's interesting, my conversations and interactions with families and owners, and, particularly when there's a potential for conflict or there's challenges, I found that for most people, respect and communication, trust tend to be the kinds of sentiments or behaviors that really lead to trying to solve for issues. And to be honest, love generally has not been the prevailing sentiment because it's difficult. And I think completely agreed, not to be but clearly, inspirationally, aspirationally, love would be the attribute that you'd look to. But practically speaking, I'm sure from your business experience, you'd find that, these are difficult issues, right, that people are dealing with. And really what you hope for is it's done respectfully in a transparent manner and in a way that engenders trust at the end of the day. Just some thoughts.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point, because it really is a definitional one, right? Are we thinking love is blind? And so, we take a deferential approach and don't necessarily engage, or is it a more all-encompassing definition of love that captures what you're talking about in terms of respect and trust and long-term best interests? So I think that's a great point. Thanks, Nadir. I'm wondering, Breen, we've talked about some of these proactive strategies, and Nizar shared earlier some governance tools his family uses to keep stakeholders on the same page. What are the risks of not having protocols or systems or structure in place?
Yeah, I'm happy to share that. It's a sad story. For me, it's a very sad story. It's a story of a business that was founded by a father who had 3 sons. His wife was not involved in the business. 3 sons went to school. 3rd born child was in law school. And he gets a call one day from his dad. And dad says, I need some help. There's a bit of a crisis in the business. Come, help me. And this kid, university age student, is thinking, okay, it might be a few weeks. Maybe I'll take a semester off school or something, but I'll go back. I'll become the lawyer that I want to be. Well, that opportunity comes and goes, and he never goes back to law school. A few years later, dad passes away suddenly. Comes time to read the will, and much to the surprise of everyone in the room, all 3 siblings, mother, and in the entire family, Father has left the business either to the youngest child, the one who was in law school, or to, he says, we'll liquidate it and just sell it to an outside party. Massive chaos in the family, lots of conflict, lawsuits amongst them. Mother's very upset, siblings are upset. This poor third born child, who's not a child anymore, is a grown man, but not his fault, right? So there's huge disruption of the family harmony. No love, Nadir, no love. And what's beautiful now is that the next generation, their G3, is coming around, bringing the family back together and starting to figure out the way forward. Now, let's look at that situation, right? Did they have any governance in place? We don't know. It wasn't a client of mine. It's a story I heard. I would guess that they lacked a common vision and values. They lacked the transparency in the conversations. They were probably, they had some ducks in a row. They had a will, which was great. There was no communication in advance. And actually, I've heard about stories like this within the community where this happens. My father has actually said his biggest nightmare is for him to go and for there to be disruption like this when he goes. So he has been extremely transparent. My mom and dad, both working in the business, have been very transparent and shared and involved, my brother Azim and I, in all of the conversations around succession, the trust that's set up, what things are going to look like. And our G3, our next generation, 4 of them, they're between 11 and 17 years old. They don't come to shareholders meetings. They don't come to business meetings per se, but we're actively involving them already. So it's never too early to start. Family is precious, and we need to do the work to keep it together.
Absolutely. And so I think what we've been really talking about here is, how do we deal with these contingency scenarios, these challenging episodes where we really need to work through them. And, a reflection that I have from my professional experience, because I've been part of shrinking business units and growing business areas, is they all, both have episodes of stress. And so maybe Nadir, do you have any examples that you might share about how this same type of framework and planning can come into use in, a more positive story scenario that would also be considered a contingency?
Sure. And it's interesting through my experiences and observing and learning. I'd say that what I found is, business is about taking risks, and we've all talked about it before. And what I found is that the best risk takers are the people that are most prepared. And, there's no substitute for being prepared to take the opportunity to make the right call. And this applies to, contingency planning in terms of what might go wrong. But to your point and question, as much about what could you do, what are scenarios you can think of and dream about that would actually solidify your position as a leader, as an example. I remember during my time at Rogers, we were on the wireless side, and we're looking at our business and trying to think of the industry structure, thinking, what could we do that would be transformational, that would just cement, in quote, our position as a leader. And, most of you hopefully are familiar with the Fido wireless brand. And at that time, it was owned by Microsoft. And we thought, boy, if we could buy that company, it would really solidify our position. Now, understand, that company wasn't for sale. There were technical reasons I won't get into that really we couldn't buy it at the time. But we thought, boy, you know what, we should get a team on this. Why don't we think about what life would be if we could get Fido? And how would we actually integrate it? And how would we position ourselves in the market? And frankly, 2 years later, literally 2 years later, turned out there was an opportunity to buy the company. And I'd say that thankfully we're prepared and ready to take it. And, from the outside world, you might think, boy, they acted really quickly and it's amazing they took this risk. But to be honest, we would say we did the most amount of work to lead up to that so that we could seize that opportunity. So a lesson for me is, make decisions and think of scenarios when you don't have to. Hardest time, arguably the worst time to, is when you have to and you have no choice. So I always encourage people, both downside and upside, think through things, think about scenarios, plan for them, think through if you have legal agreements. Downsides are hard to talk about, but better to do it from a position of strength than when it's an issue and you haven't thought about it or dealt with it. So, and I'd encourage as much proactive thinking, both in terms of downside, but importantly on upside and growth.
Yeah, it's definitely a theme that's emerging here in terms of preparedness is key. And I think if we sort of recap what we've covered so far, that came up very prominently as we talked about business continuity and succession. It has come up again very prominently as we have been talking about business contingency and dealing with the unexpected. And so I think that I would really flag that for our audience. Now, I want to make sure that we've got some time to talk about wealth transfer as well, because of course, family businesses are the engines that generate wealth. And we have talked about continuity and succession of the businesses themselves, but often we extract wealth from those businesses. And maybe this is my bias from my own professional experience, but I would think that wealth management and wealth planning is its own ballgame. So maybe, Nizar, could I ask you, what are some ways that you've planned for wealth transfer in your own family? And what would you highlight that folks should be sort of exploring, getting on their radar, thinking about as they engage in these sort of reflections for their own businesses?
Wealth transfer happens in two ways. One is through the will. Now, I said to everybody, a will, and as Amrit just mentioned earlier, it should not be a legacy or dispute. So have it well thought out, and it should be based on equity and equality. Equity is where you make adjustments for the status, but don't ignore other members of the family. Otherwise, it will end up in court. I've dealt with cases in the community like that. And they think it's a joke. They go to the court, they throw out the will. So this is a very important issue. Second is tax planning. Now, tax planning does not mean complete avoidance of tax. It is tax deferral. If you have a trust, it only has a life of 21 years. 21 years, it has to be rolled out to the beneficiaries. And if it's not, it will revert back to the settlor. And then what? Whenever that person who inherits or gets those properties passes away, there's deemed disposition. So 25% goes in tax. Whereas if you're able to roll it out, then it goes on a tax deferred basis. And it's the beneficiaries, when they sell ultimately, they pay tax, deferred taxes as well as the gain. So that. The difficult part is, if you have a trust that's 21 years, and say you started at the age of 40, when you're 61, you got to roll out. And how do you deal with that? I went through that exercise. And so this means you need a lot of investment advisors. There are ways around it, which we are now beginning to discover because we've got another trust. And so that. The other aspect is deemed disposition is on hard assets. If you're cash, now if you got, and say it's in the stock market, obviously there is deemed disposition because the stock appreciation has to be brought into account. But it has to be a diversified portfolio. You can't put all your money into real estate. I have. No, not really. But majority of our people have. And I said that is great. There are two issues. One is this deemed disposition. So you have to have a mechanism for paying that tax. And one answer, and you go to investment advisors like you, Salima, they'll advise you to take out insurance. So in other words, you have prepared for that contingency. The second is markets go up and down. And when you desperately need the money, market may be down, you may not have enough cash. So it's important that we all maintain liquidity. And it can be any percentage. I was at one time recommending to the Jamaat, it should be 30%. If you're 100 million, invest 70 million, keep 30 million in liquid form so that whenever you need it, it's there. Because in the long run, go back to the time of creation, real estate has always gone up in value, but it goes through ups and downs and you prepare for it. So in terms of wealth preservation, I mean, these are some of the principles. Use the best advisors you can find. And final point is, if you are invested in the US, if you are not properly structured, when it comes to obtaining probate, they will assess you for death duties, not on just what you have in the US, but in your global portfolio. And that tax is 40%. So suggestion is, please look at that carefully, because I know a number of my friends are invested in the US. And so this is an issue. And we spend a lot of money on this, trying to figure out how to deal with it.
Yeah, no, I love that you've really underscored the need for advisors here, because I think it would really be a reach for us to be able to offer anything on this topic that would broadly serve the interests of our audience, because everyone's circumstances would be very different. And so I think advisors are critical. I think you've also painted a picture of complexity, right? And so it's not just going to be a check the box exercise. This is on the list for next week, we'll get it done. This is a process that takes months, if not longer, of planning, and also one that's dynamic, right? You referenced tax rates, and those are changing all the time. So I think it's really about developing a culture and an ongoing practice of review. And Brina, I wonder, do you have anything else to add in terms of what types of contingency scenarios come up in a wealth planning and transfer context?
Yeah, Salima, you talked about complexity, and relationships are super complex. We're in a new world. We talked about that. Our next gen, our now gen, we're not all married. We're not all living, we're not all in relationship. A lot of families, or a lot of people are together and living together outside of marriage. So it's very important and really smart to ensure the families have prenup agreements and cohabitation agreements. Now, the key here is that these are not personal. So for example, I'll talk about our family again and do this with clients as well. It's already established that this is a norm in our family, that there will be prenups and there will be cohab agreements. So these kids who are between 11 and 17 in our next generation, they know it's not personal to them, but they just know this is just how we do things, right? So have these policies in place so that it becomes non-personal, but you're protecting the family wealth. And chances are both parties are going to come to the table with this idea anyways. It's what I'm seeing in my clients. It's not a novel conversation. It's actually becoming very regular, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you kind of referenced this sort of generation and cultural shift, and maybe I'll wear the millennial hat in the room for a minute, because one of the things that comes to my mind as I think about legacy, our digital assets, or maybe even reputation in a world of social media, which I feel probably has some relevance to a family business context where a name can be spread across generations, and it's relevance for the reputation of the business. Are those kind of topics that are coming up for you, and where these governance sort of practices or tools can apply as well?
Absolutely. We talk about reputation as social capital. So it's just another asset class. We talk about digital assets as just another asset class, and they have to be considered, and they are being considered. Young ones need to understand reputation. So in our family, our rule, don't post anything on social media that you're not okay with your grandparents seeing, right? Because it's there forever. So we have these conversations constantly at the dinner table. You know, we meet every 2 weeks for dinner, and we talk about these kind of up and coming topics, and they're very much a part of our conversations, and they should be. So thanks, Salima, for raising that. Yeah.
The last topic that I wanted to make sure we covered as we talk about wealth was really compensation, because I think, compensation and wealth can be built through compensation for work and also through shareholder rents in this different sort of business hat and ownership hat. Nadir, do you have any sort of thing to say about on this subject, how to compensate family members who are active versus those who aren't, or maybe non-family executives in a family business context? I
think it's really important to define the role. For the most part, people stumble into things, but when people ask about compensation, I always start with, what is the role? Make sure you're able to actually articulate it, and then if you went to the market with that role, what would your compensation framework look like? And for me, it would make complete sense that becomes the proxy for what you would pay for a family member or somebody from outside in terms of management. So what I found is it's not the intellectually, it's not the concept that's challenging, it's how you get there. Because what tends to happen is people stumble onto it. So you could have two family members, and invariably one's more active, and one will, by definition, take the lead. And when life is good, nobody actually talks about things like compensation. When it gets challenging, you'll have one of two scenarios. There's many, but I'll set out two. One is the person that's doing all the legwork goes, how come I'm doing all this work and I'm not getting any paid any more than this other family member? And we're both, quote unquote, getting the same compensation. And that becomes the root of all kinds of challenging discussions and potential conflict. Or, it's the person that arguably is looking at the situation going, how come this person is getting paid so much? And we never set it up that way, because, we were all going to be active in the business, and he or she is doing this particular role, I am, but that person's getting paid more. So I really think it comes back to something we've talked about, it's a bit of a theme, is thinking ahead in terms of, what is the role, what should the compensation framework be when it's not an issue. The challenge is most people tend to deal with it when it's become an issue.
Yes,
and
right.
So, that's, to me, I think it's really important, is to, again, set it up right in the first place.
Perfect. And thanks for pulling all of those pieces together for us, because we are at the point where we actually do need to start wrapping up. We've covered a ton of ground, but as Ambreen foreshadowed, we really have only begun to scratch the surface. And so, I really hope those of you in our audience have come away with something that you've written down on a Post-it or made a note on your phone to follow up with for your family business. And as we begin to wrap up here, maybe I'll go to our panelists for just any final closing remarks that you might have. Nadir, do you want to go first?
Sure. And I'll pick up on something President Kanji you referred to, is communication. And, I have a saying that you can't legislate behavior, right? So a lot of times families, the founder, going back to where my starting point was, we'll think about succession and spend a lot of time thinking about it, creating tax structures, creating frameworks for, how succession will work. And it's all on paper. But the missing piece is the communication with the family members. Ambreen, you talked about that a lot too. So how do you get people involved so that they're actually part of that process? So when that succession happens, it's not something that they're seeing for the first time. Because no matter how well thought out, how well articulated, it's not something you can legislate unless people have bought into it and have been part of the process. So I would encourage what President Kanji said, communication is central to everything.
And how about you, Ambreen? Any final thoughts?
Yes, I would I'd piggyback off that and talk about, it's really important, not just in a business context, but in a family context, to have vision and include all of your generations. President Kanji talked about this, right? The children have amazing ideas. All generations can contribute to this conversation. Establish the vision for the family, vision for wealth and values. And it's never too early to begin preparing your next generation. They don't have to work in the business, but they will be stewards of wealth. They will. They're going to need preparation, and they're going to need to understand at the basis, the basic level, what those family values are, so that you end up in a consistent situation as opposed to a challenging one. Ask for help. In our community, we have this tradition, and I'm hoping we're losing it and shaking it off as we're talking right now, but this, let's not air our dirty laundry. Well, we need help, right? It's okay to ask for help. And there, you can go to the Economic Planning Board. There's a wealth of information there. If you need, dispute type things, you can go to CAB. And Family Enterprise Canada is also another resource for those who aren't familiar with it, but it's a wonderful resource where there's tons of knowledge and advisors and juicy stuff for us as family businesses.
I'm going to deviate. I want to address our Farsi-speaking Jamaat. As we look at picture in Afghanistan, at the moment it's a chaos. Hazimam was the first philanthropist, let's call it, AKDN. He assured the government that AKDN will stand by the people of Afghanistan. He advocated that in international conferences, and this is what's now happening. My suggestion to our Farsi-speaking brothers and sisters is, think about Afghanistan's future. You could play a vital role. And it's not just a question of you serving the community, it's serving your families, because you now have know-how from Canada. You operate businesses here. You may be able to take that knowledge to Afghanistan and set up enterprises there and change the scenario of family wealth. I'll give you a simple example. Friends from various parts of the world, they come here, oh, can you introduce me to this franchise company? Can you introduce me to that? And I said, what are you going to do with it? So you can't imagine the value of these franchises. They love these names. Today, you ask a franchise company for rights to Afghanistan, they'll probably give it to you. But that has value. So my suggestion to them is get together, think about what you can do in Afghanistan. You know the country. You know the way of doing business. I'm not talking about anything illegal, abnormal, or dishonest. Based on principles of integrity, you can set up big businesses over there. That would be my final message.
That's perfect. And it's a really nice uplifting note on the opportunity, which is where you set us out. And so I love that we've circled back to that. And, I think if I've taken away three themes that we've kind of hammered over and over here, it really has been, be proactive, start your planning processes now. It is, you can't do this work in a vacuum. You can't do it by yourself. You need to bring all your stakeholders along for the ride. So have the conversations. There's a lot of conversations that need to be had. They're not all going to be easy, but lean into them. And the third really being, you don't need to do this alone. In fact, please don't do it alone. Engage advisors, reach out, find the right people to ask your questions, to help you figure out what questions you need to be asking. Don't be shy to ask for help. And I think, it's very, very timely here that our discussion coincides with EPB's launch of a referral program for business owners who can access Ismaili professionals with a variety of different experiences. Whether it's legal, accounting, digital transformation, It's a new program, and business owners can access up to 60 minutes of free consultation in each business area. So we hope that those of you on the call will take advantage of that. And so if it's of interest to you, please reach out to your local EPB team for more information. And in closing, I want to thank you all, our panelists in particular, for making this time, but all of you as well who have joined us. We hope you've taken something away today, and if you want to refresh on anything that was covered, this webinar has been recorded and will be available at iicanada.org. Thank you again, everyone, and Yali Madat.